She was standing in front of millions of people, and she was completely alone. That is the image no one talks about when they talk about Marie Osmond. Not the smile, not the sequined costumes, not the voice that felt like Sunday morning in a warm house. The image is this: a woman on a stage, lights blazing, audience roaring, and somewhere behind her eyes, something quietly breaking. For 50 years, she gave the world everything it asked for: the warmth, the charm, the unshakable cheerfulness that made her feel like a best friend you had never actually met. America trusted her. America loved her. America never once stopped to ask whether she was okay, and maybe that was the problem. Because the truth about Marie Osmond, the real truth, the one she spent most of her life burying so deep she almost forgot it was there, is nothing like the woman the cameras captured. What she was hiding was darker than anyone imagined. What she survived was heavier than any stage performance could ever show. And the moment she finally decided to speak, it changed everything. This is the story behind the smile. And once you hear it, you will never see her the same way again. She came into this world on October 13, 1959, in Ogden, Utah, the only girl in a family of 9 brothers and one of the most famous performing dynasties in American history. The Osmonds were everywhere: television, radio, magazine covers. They were wholesome and talented and completely impossible to escape. And right at the center of all of it was Marie. Bright-eyed, dimple-cheeked, already learning how to perform before she was old enough to understand what performing actually cost. She was 13 years old when Paper Roses hit #1. 13. While other girls her age were figuring out who they were, Marie Osmond was already a brand, already a symbol, already carrying the weight of a family name and a public image on the shoulders of a child who hadn't yet had a single normal day. By 1976, Donnie and Marie was one of the most watched shows in the country. They were America's sweethearts, packaged perfectly, always smiling, seemingly untouched by anything dark or difficult or real. That image was no accident. Behind the choreography and the costumes and the carefully rehearsed warmth, the pressure was enormous. The schedules were relentless. And for a young girl who had never been given permission to be uncertain or tired or lost, something was building. Something with no outlet and no name. She said it herself, years later. She never felt like she was allowed to fall apart. There was always a camera, always a performance, always a version of herself to deliver to an audience that needed her to be fine. So she learned to be fine, even when everything inside her wasn't. And that skill, that practiced, deeply embedded ability to smile and keep going, would follow her for the rest of her life. But what it cost her in private was something no one saw coming. The first crack appeared in 1982. Marie married Steve Craig, a former basketball player. She was 22. The marriage looked exactly right. Wholesome, traditional, exactly the kind of choice people expected from Marie Osmond. But by 1985, it was over. She didn't speak about it publicly. She smiled. She moved forward. She kept performing. That was what Marie did. That was all Marie had ever known how to do. But the divorce didn't just hurt her. It reached inside her identity and pulled something loose. She had been raised inside, a faith that held family and commitment as sacred. The failure of her marriage wasn't just painful. It felt like shame. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just quietly settles in and stays. She buried it. She kept moving. In 1986, she married again. Brian Blosel, a music producer. They built a large family together, 2 biological children, and 5 they adopted. From the outside, it looked like Marie had finally found solid ground. But what happened next? No one was prepared for. In the early 1990s, after the birth of one of her children, something inside Marie Osmond went very, very quiet. Not peaceful, quiet. The other kind, a depression so deep it pulled the color out of everything. An inability to feel joy, real joy, not performed joy, that frightened her in ways she had no words for. She felt, she said later, like she was watching her own life through glass. Present, but completely disconnected. There, but not there. For a woman whose entire career was built on warmth and connection and the ability to make other people feel something, this was terrifying. And the worst part? She told no one, because telling someone meant admitting something was wrong. And Marie Osmond had spent her entire life making absolutely sure the world never saw that. So she pushed it down, buried it under schedules and commitments and the relentless, exhausting work of being Marie Osmond. And the darkness waited. The 1990s should have been triumphant. She launched a wildly successful doll business. She wrote books. She hosted programs. She remained one of the most recognizable faces in American entertainment. Warm, tireless, always on. But behind all of it, the weight was growing. The unaddressed depression never disappeared. It only deepened. And at the same time, her marriage was quietly unraveling. A growing distance between her and Brian that no amount of effort or faith seemed to close. 8. Children. A public image to maintain? A private life coming apart at every seam. She kept smiling. She kept performing. And then came the moment the whole world watched, but no one truly understood. In 2007, during a live broadcast of Dancing with the Stars, Marie Osmond collapsed on stage. Not stumbled, not wobbled. She went completely limp and hit the floor in front of a live studio audience and millions of people watching at home. The world held its breath. And then she laughed it off. She got up, made a joke, gave the audience what they needed: reassurance, charm, the unshakable Marie Osmond they had always known. And the moment was quickly absorbed into her mythology. She fell, she got back, up. Of course she did. That was who she was. But no one asked the real question. No one wondered why a woman that strong, that practiced, that experienced, was suddenly falling. Because the answer wasn't physical. The answer was that she had been running on empty for years, carrying unspoken grief and untreated depression, and a marriage that was ending, and a public identity that demanded she be completely fine at all times. And something in her body had finally, quietly, said enough. It was a warning. And then, just months later, came something that shattered everything else. In early 2010, Marie and Brian Blosel announced their divorce after nearly 25 years of marriage. And for the first time in her public life, Marie Osmond let the world see her cry. But even that raw, unguarded moment was not the full truth. The full truth was still coming, and nothing could have prepared anyone for it. On February 26, 2010, just weeks after the divorce announcement, Marie received a phone call. Her son, Michael, 18 years old, had taken his own life. He was gone. The grief that followed, cannot be described. It can only be acknowledged. Marie had lost a child, a young man she had adopted, raised, loved, and quietly fought for through years of addiction and emotional pain that the family had been trying to help him carry. She had to announce it publicly. She had no choice. She was Marie Osmond. Nothing in her life was allowed to stay private for long. And then she did something that stunned even the people who had followed her for decades. 3 days after Michael died, she performed. She stood on the Dancing with the Stars stage, eyes red and face composed, and she danced. She said it was what Michael would have wanted. She said performing was the only language she had left. That grief had taken everything else, and this one thing, she could still do. The audience rose to their feet. They wept with her. America saw something real that night. Not the polished image, not the managed warmth, but a mother, in the deepest pain imaginable, doing the only thing she knew. And the world broke open for her. But here is what that moment also revealed, something sitting quietly beneath the courage and the composure and the devastating beauty of watching. Her dance through the worst loss of her life. Marie Osmond had been performing through pain for 50 years, and after losing Michael, she finally had to face the question she had been running from since she was 13 years old. Who was she when the cameras stopped rolling? What had all of it cost her? What had she buried so deep she could no longer find it? The answer she found was not what she expected. Buried beneath 5 decades of performance and image and carefully maintained warmth was a woman who had never once truly been allowed to fall apart. And she was finally ready to. The years that followed Michael's death became the most honest of her life. She began speaking, carefully at first, then with a courage that surprised even the people who knew her best. The postpartum depression she had carried and never treated. The loneliness inside her marriage. The belief, embedded in her since childhood, that her value was entirely tied to what she could deliver. To an audience, she said it out loud. That belief had nearly destroyed her. Naming it was the hardest thing she had ever done. In 2011, she remarried Steve Craig, her first husband. It was unexpected and deeply personal. A choice made not for image or approval, but for something quieter and more real. The kind of truth that only becomes visible after tremendous loss. And through all of it, the revelation that mattered most was the simplest one. Marie Osmond had never just been fighting the pressures of fame. She had been fighting herself. A lifetime of grief she wasn't allowed to feel. A mind she wasn't allowed to rest. A version of herself she performed so convincingly that she eventually forgot it was a performance at all. That was the dark chapter she finally broke her silence on. Not a scandal. Not a secret. Not a public meltdown. Just the quiet, devastating truth of a woman who gave everything she had to a world that never once asked what it was costing her. Today, Marie Osmond moves through her life differently. She still performs. She still carries that warmth. But she'll tell you herself, it's real now. Not a costume, not something she puts on before walking out the door. Just her. She speaks openly about mental health, about asking for help before the weight becomes unbearable, about the way depression hides in plain sight behind the brightest smiles. She speaks about Michael, carefully, lovingly, always. He is not a chapter she closes. She has rebuilt with intention. choosing real moments over public approval, genuine connection over performance, quiet over noise. And the woman who spent 50 years making the entire world feel seen and warm and cared for has finally learned the one thing no one ever thought to teach her. She deserved that warmth, too. She always did. So what do you think about Marie Osmond's story? After everything she carried, for decades, in silence, behind that smile, she look different to you now? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if stories like this one matter to you, the real stories, the ones that happen behind the fame and the lights, subscribe right now and hit the notifications bell, because more are coming, and they are absolutely worth staying for.